And about the fourth sentence down, it says the following, and quote, indoctrination is one of the major roadblocks to critical thinking, end quote. And that's what's happening. If you can say yes to that question, that's what's happening. This is documented stuff by people who have researched what it does, what that upbringing, what that philosophy does to the human mind. So to continue to stay involved, at some point, having all this information, because you can't unsee it, you can't unhear it, right? I'm talking specifically to the witnesses who are listening and know they shouldn't be based on what they've been taught, but you should be. You should be listening. You should be thinking. You should be processing, right? If you can answer yes to those questions, there's still something wrong. There's still something wrong. So let me get back. I'm sorry I went off course for a little bit there, but let me get back to what we're talking about. Ultimately, what I'm saying, what the Surgeon General is saying is your body keeps score of your experiences, right? But specifically, we're talking about Jehovah's Witnesses, but it works across the board. Your body's keeping track, keeping account. And at some point in the future, your body's going to have some type of reaction if you stay in a philosophy or an environment that isn't beneficial to you. And for those of you who are still on the fence, I'm going to give you one more thing to take a look at. And I hope you guys are looking at this stuff, because everything that I've given you is stuff that I've read and actually went through on my journey to being a better person and being a better me. And the name of this book is called The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. And the author is Bessel van der Kolk. He's a medical doctor. And I'll put it in the, I won't butcher his name anymore, but I'll put it in the description for you guys to check it out. But I want to warn you, if you're not ready to, if you buy this book or you go down to Barnes & Noble and you start reading, if you're not ready to address whatever your issue is, wait before you read this. Because, and I don't say that as a disservice to you or to the author of this book. It is an amazing book. It's an amazing book. But it's very frank. It's very direct. It's just talking about the healing of negative experiences, right? But it's very open, and the types of situations that they talk about, it's very frank, and it will make you look into whatever your situation is. So again, if you're not ready, don't read it. But the whole point I'm bringing up about this book is that here is another professional who's saying, hey, you guys need to understand that your experiences are stored up in your body, right? They're stored up in your body. So take that information, you guys, and pass it on, but use it, know it, because it's important that we begin to understand and articulate our experiences. Because when you're able to do that, things start falling into place. They start making sense, and you can deal with things. I didn't know I didn't really come from a home of emotional abuse or anything like that, but the emotional neglect that my parents were displaying because they were wrapped up in the organization, that makes sense to me now to understand and be able to articulate that's what that was, right? I don't think, for the most part, it isn't something that parents are doing on purpose. They're obviously, right, brainwashed. And in my house, my dad was the presiding overseer, and so he's in charge of the congregation. So there was a little more pressure for us, but my dad and I weren't having discussions that, fathers and sons should have. My mom and I weren't having those discussions that help a mother and son build their bond. So, you're living in a house where there's no attention to you as an individual. And there were 6 of us, right? I don't remember what their experiences with it was, but I'm for sure that we weren't having those discussions about what I thought, what I felt, what was going on with me. There was no encouragement to do anything positive. There wasn't encouragement to do anything bad, but on the opposite end, there was no encouragement to do anything good. There were just no discussions. So I don't know if I can call it this, but it was almost an emotional abandonment. I guess that falls under neglect. But now I can understand it and talk about it, and then look over my life and see how that played into relationships. That's why this information is important, and I put it out there because it helps you be a better you. Now, let's move on to the brain, right? The brain. One of the designs of the Jehovah's Witness religion on the children is to overload their brains with the doomsday scenarios so that it forces them to stay inside the congregation. Listen to what I just said to you. One of the designs of the Jehovah's Witness, one of their tools is to overload the brains of kids so that they always remain inside the organization. And they do that, again, with all the doomsday scenarios and Armageddon being constantly around the corner, stuff we've talked about before. And what that does, as I mentioned in episode 1, is it overloads and overrides your protective mechanism, right? The brain creates additional electrical impulses with regard to negative information as opposed to positive. And the whole point of that is used to say, hey, you need to get out of here. This isn't right. So the Jehovah's Witness, they override you with that. And what it does to kids is it increases your anxiety and your alertness throughout your entire childhood. So what that ends up doing in terms of cognitive functions is it ruins or stunts your ability to self-regulate, self-control, impulse control. For some people, memory and reasoning, and your attachment to relationships. This is by design, you guys. This is by design. Looking more specifically in the areas of self-control and impulse control, I wish, that was a muscle that hadn't been exercised throughout your entire childhood, right? Most Jehovah's Witness kids who are born in, I'm just off the top of my head, on average spend about 20 years, 2 decades, right? Most of the time in our communities, around about 18, 19, 20, it's time for you to leave the house. So 20 years, that muscle has been beaten up and never exercised. So now you're released into the world, and I wish I would have been able to exercise that muscle or that piece of the brain, because without having any, malicious intents or anything, my friends and I found ourselves on the wrong side of the barrel many times. Now, were those dudes wrong? Yeah, they knew we weren't a part of that lifestyle, right? But my point is, had we known or knew to think that we need to rein in the way we're behaving, right? All the alcohol, all the weed, all that stuff. And this is, over 20 years ago. You're talking about 18, 19 years old, right? Had we known how to exercise that muscle, I'm pretty sure that we would have missed most of those interactions. I'll call it that. We'll call it interactions. But we didn't know to do that. That area of the brain that they're squashing with their doomsday material is key to building a sustainable life, a productive life. And we were out just living We were glad to be out, first and foremost. That was our whole thing. We were so glad to be out, happy, free. All that weight is lifted off our shoulders. But now that I'm older, with freedom comes responsibility. And we weren't responsible or didn't know to rein things in and use a little bit more self-control, a little bit more impulse control. You know, the liquor, the weed, the women. We were just engulfed in that. And a lot of it is we didn't know what comes with those things. When you're living a specific way, we didn't know because we've been sheltered our whole lives, sheltered in deception and doom. So it makes sense that we would fall into those types of things in excess. We didn't know. We didn't have any strength. And I'm calling it a muscle figuratively, the parts of the brain that govern those areas, just figuratively. But the technical term for those areas are called the amygdala and the hippocampus. We simply didn't know. And the underlying story there is, we're not prepared for the world. We're not prepared. I can remember working early in my career, and again, there's no instruction on what to expect at a job. And very early in my career, I didn't really know how disrespectful people could be if they're intimidated by you, right? And from a lot of years went by where I would simply just walk off of jobs, no self-control, because I couldn't handle the way people were talking to me. I found it disrespectful, and there are other things that go into that, right? A guy told me one time he was grooming me for business, and he told me that because of the way I think, it's really not the people that you're fighting against. It's the structure that they have in place, and the way you think is a threat to that for people who can only think inside of a system. And I thought, damn, I wish you would have told me that 10, 15 years ago. You know what I mean? I would have known a thing or two, but I didn't have the self-control or the knowing that this is how 9 to 5 works. And you have to, with all due respect to everybody who's working at 9 to 5, it's mostly demeaning for most people. And I didn't know or have the self-control for years to deal with that. I would just simply walk off the job, say what I had to say on my way out and be done with it. And when you don't have any self-control, right? I wasn't a beast or anything like that. I don't want you guys to take it too far. But just at that level, when you don't have any self-control and can't rein yourself in, the decisions you make are going to really hinder your life. For any young people that are listening, if you're still in your 20s, your teens, you got to learn how to rein it in, because you'll start messing up your credit. You'll start messing up relationships with people. You'll start, in terms of the job world, reputations go around, especially if you're planning on staying in the same industry. People will know who you are, especially if it's a small industry. People will know, and all those things come back to bite you. They really do. And it took me a long time to figure that out, but so much was lost. So if you're young and you're listening, talk to your mom and dad about that kind of stuff, about how you need to approach the job force. And especially now, because it's so different, I couldn't imagine having to go back and sit in a cubicle at this point in my life. But yeah, I didn't have the wherewithal to know that this isn't the right way to work or to do things or to handle situations. And anything I found as aggressive towards me or I found disrespectful, I let them know about it right then and there on the spot. I'm not a bad dude. I'm not an angry person or any of that. It was just to me, simple, the golden rule, right? Do unto others. And the world of 9 to 5 isn't